Hello, and shalom to my brothers and sisters in Master Yeshua, the Messiah, who have his testimony and guard his commandments. Brother Nick here, and today is the 28th day of the 8th month on Yahweh Elohim's solar calibrated, non-Gregorian, 364-day calendar of the Dead Sea Scrolls, of the Torah and the Prophets, of the Book of Jubilees, of the Book of Enoch. It is the Gregorian equivalent is November 15th, 2022. I'm here on the island of Cyprus, and this video is on Tekufa Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah, and the agricultural calendar of the two 364-day calendar years. So I'll be taking a look at the agricultural calendar year in this video. For those of you arriving on my channel, if you're not familiar, I have an entire playlist dedicated to the restored official Enoch calendar, the 364-day calendar that does not use the Gregorian days of the week, which are false days of the week. I have plenty of videos explaining that, so if you haven't seen it, check out my playlist on it. Like I said, there are many false Gregorian versions of the 364-day calendar. It's because the people who are putting these calendars out there, who are trying to be calendar teachers, they fail to understand that the calendar does not use the Gregorian days of the week. These people still use the Gregorian days of the week that they teach in their calendar, and they teach the false Saturday Sabbath, which is part of it because the Gregorian days of the week are false. And even so, he's one of the top translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Geza Vermes. In his translation, he even failed to understand that the Gregorian days of the week are false days of the week. As in his commentary, he inserts the Gregorian Sunday and Monday and Sunday to try to help people understand the calendar, but it's a roadblock to the true calendar and the true Sabbath day, which is a solar Sabbath. I have videos all about the solar heavenly Sabbath. You can check it out. So this is my last video that I just put out about 5 days ago. And if you haven't seen this video prior to the video that you're watching now, you should watch this video if you have not seen it. This video was on the Tekufa, the 364-day calendar, and Dead Sea Scroll 4Q324D, which was a newly translated or reconstructed Dead Sea Scroll. So you need to watch this video if you haven't seen it, because in that Dead Sea Scroll, it's a calendar scroll, and it talks about the locations of the Tekufa. And so I use that information and explain the correct locations on the 364-day calendar. So if you haven't seen it, you need to check that out. Now this video is on Tekufa Hashanah, which means the turning of the year. So it's important to know the Tekufa, about the Tekufa as well, because that sets up this video that you're watching now. Also in that video, I briefly mention about the possibility, or what I understand to be, the two concurrent 364-day calendars that are offset by 6 months. The ecclesiastical calendar year, which is months number 1 through 12, and then also the civil regnal calendar year of months number 7 through 6, which I believe and understand the Shemitah cycle, the Shemitah and the Jubilee cycle is on, as I hope to explain in my next video. So in this video that you're now watching now, I'm going to support and prove the existence of the civil regnal calendar year of months 7 through 6, which is the agricultural calendar year, based on the term Tekufa Hashanah and Yatzah Hashanah in Exodus 34:22 and Exodus chapter 23 verse 16. And in doing so, I'm going to be proving the agricultural year, because I'm going to be looking at the agricultural order of events and prove that there isn't an agricultural calendar. So in this video, there's some keyword phrases that you're going to have to be aware of. Tekufa Hashanah, which is the turn of the year, found in Exodus 34:22 and 2 Chronicles 24:23. Yatzah Hashanah, which is the going forth of the year, translated as end of the year, but I'll take a look at that in Exodus 23:16. Rosh Hashanah, being the head beginning of the year, found in Ezekiel chapter 40 verse 1, Enoch chapter 82:15, but it wasn't really Rosh Hashanah, but it says beginning of the year. It's the original that we have now is from the Ethiopic Ge'ez. And then the book of Gad the Seer, chapter 14, verse 1, which is an extra-canonical Old Testament book. Also, you need to know the keyword phrase Rosh Hashanah, which means the beginning and chief of the year of Deuteronomy chapter 11 through 12. We'll be taking a look at Deuteronomy as well in this video. And then Teshuvah, or Teshuvah Hashanah, which means the return of the year, in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, 1 Kings 20 verses 20 and 22 and 26, 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 1, and 2 Chronicles 36, verse 10. So when we examine these phrases and compare the verses in which they are used, it will help us understand that there are two concurrent 364-day calendar years offset by 6 months each. And when they're offset by that 6 months, it explains itself almost. So here is the same keyword phrases that you just saw with their verses, with their meaning under the keyword phrase and the verses. And I went ahead and charted out what month that they are talking about, the context of the verse, or what's going on that's regarding. So for Tekufa Hashanah, the turn of the year, it is Exodus 34:22, and in that verse, it's talking about the 7th month, which is a fall for the turn of the year. And the context is the Feast of the Ingathering, which is what we know to be Sukkot, or in the English, Tabernacles. 2 Chronicles chapter 24:23, it's speaking of the first month, the spring Tekufa Hashanah, and that was when Aram, Syria, Damascus invaded and defeated Judah. That's the context of that timing of that passage. The other keyword phrase we have is Yatsa Hashanah, or Yatsa Hashanah, and that's the going forth, or translated incorrectly as the end of the year, but that's in Exodus chapter 23, verse 16, and that is also in context of the Feast of the Ingathering Sukkot Tabernacles, which we know is the 7th month, and that is the fall beginning, and the 7th month is the beginning of the fall season. We have Rosh Hashanah, the head or beginning of the year. Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1 is the only place in the Torah or the Tanakh that uses Rosh Hashanah. And that's a tricky one because the Masoretic text in the Aramaic agree that it appears to be talking about the 7th month in the fall, while the Greek Septuagint has it as the 1st month. So the Masoretic and the Aramaic Targums agree of the 7th month, and that's a tricky one, and I'm going to be talking more about that in my next video coming up. Enoch 82 verse 15 in the Ge'ez, we know that that is speaking of the first day of the 364-day calendar year. So that's going to be that beginning of the year is speaking of the first month in the spring. And then Gad the Seer, it specifically dates that passage. It not only does it say Rosh Hashanah, but it also says on the first day of the 7th month. So it's talking about the 7th month in fall for the head of the year in Gad the Seer. Now that text, I haven't seen the Hebrew of that text, but that is going off of 2 different translations. I'm taking it at face value for this. And the next keyword phrase that we got to take a look at is Reshith Hashanah. And that's similar to Rosh Hashanah. I'll get into the definition of that coming up. Beginning of the year, or the chief of the year. And that is found in Deuteronomy 11 verse 12. This passage that this verse is a part of is specifically an agricultural order. Specifically, verse 15 gives us the early and the latter rain. And so that is going to be speaking of the 7th month in fall. So there is a beginning of the year. Now I'll get into that and I'll prove that before I talk more about that. And then we have Teshuvah, or Teshuvah Hashanah, the returning of the year, return of the year. And all of these passages are dealing with the first month, which is the springtime period, or the springtime period when kings go out, yatsa. Kings go out, and that Hebrew word for kings going out to go out is yatsa, which is the same word as Yatsa Hashanah. And in 2 Samuel 11 verse 1, it's David sending Joab when kings go out. That's what the verse says. 1 Kings 20 is talking about Ben-Hadad in Assyria. 2 Chronicles, kings go out, Yatsa, for war. David sent out Joab. It's the same thing as 2 Samuel. And then Nebuchadnezzar sent to deport Jehoiakim back to Babylon. A lot of people are putting that in the first month. So Teshuvah Hashanah is exclusively speaking of the first month, the springtime period, as the return of the year. Reshit Hashanah, I'm going to prove, is the seventh. That's speaking of the seventh month. Here, Rosh Hashanah, which is like Reshit Hashanah. This term appears to be used for two different years, the seventh month and the first month, depending. Yatsa Hashanah, that's the Feast of the Ingathering, specific, only unique to the seventh month. And then Tekufa Hashanahs, we have one mention or one use of this phrase in the seventh month, the Feast of the Ingathering, Sukkot, and then one in the first month regarding kings going out. So the term Tekufa Hashanah has a dual usage, and it's being used for two different times of the year. Again, this is exclusively first month. This term is exclusively seventh. This is mixed, but 2/3 of it is in the Hebrew is seventh month. This is seventh month, and then this is a mixed term for both the seventh month and the first month. So now that I've shared that with you, I want to get more into the meanings and identifying some of these so I can prove or at least present a great argument for a agricultural year is months 7 through 6. And to do that, I'm going to be looking specifically at and comparing Tekufa Hashanah of Exodus 34:22 to Yatsa Hashanah of Exodus 23:16, because they're both talking about the Feast of the Ingathering, Sukkot. Both Feasts of the Ingathering and Sukkot. So again, these two verses I'm going to be taking a look at and comparing these two words, because I'm going to try to show that these verses right here, Exodus 34:22 and 23:16, they're congruent verses. And based on the word Yatsa, I'm going to suggest and prove that there is an agricultural year as months number 7 through 6. So before I get into showing you the agricultural year of months 7 through 6, I first want to get into the keyword phrases and define the ecclesiastical calendar year. In Exodus 12 verse 2, we are given the instruction, the plain instruction, that the beginning head of the months, the Hodeshim, the renewing cycles, which there are 12 of, is the first month. And this is very logical that the year starts with month number 1, Rishon Hodesh. So Exodus 12 verse 2, this month, speaking of the first month, the month of the Passover, shall be unto you the beginning, Rosh, of months, Hodeshim. It shall be the first, Rishon, month, Hodesh, of the year, Hashanah, to you. So this is the calendar year. Month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 is this calendar year. But there is also a secondary calendar that is in the scriptures of months 7 through 6, which is the agricultural year that I'm going to explain in this video. I hope to explain in this video. Here's the Hebrew if you need it. So this calendar year is defined number 1 through 12. We know that. And we know also that the Rishon Hodesh, which is month number 1, is also called Abib. Abib. We are also given the understanding that the first month, Rishon Hodesh, is in the spring when the barley is Abib, and thus the month is named after the Abib barley. And it's important to understand regarding the barley, that barley takes around 90 days from planting to harvest, and you have to weed out the weeds 1 to 2 times before the plants shade out of the competing weeds. So you do have to weed out, take out the weeds out of the barley field. This means that barley, to be abib, to be green heads during the first month, it has to be planted during months 9, 10, using modern farming practices. Where I'm at here on the island of Cyprus, our house that we let is in the middle of wheat and barley fields, and they started seeding the ground here, and this is the 28th day of the 8th month. And so they're just starting to seed right now here on the island of Cyprus, which is basically the same climate as Israel. It's rocky, it's dry. That's using modern farming techniques. So back in the day, they might have planted the seed as early as in the 8th month. So knowing this, it will help us understand the order of the Shemitah year and a false start of this agricultural calendar. So here is Genesis 26:12, and it could be proof that the agricultural year is months number 7 through 6, and I'm going to go ahead and explain that. Quote, "Then Isaac sowed in that land and received in the same year 100-fold, and Yahweh blessed him." And this is the King James Version right here. So this verse is giving us the order and timing of the year of agricultural events. First, Isaac sowed in the land, and the harvest and reaping was second. He received and reaped, or second, which constitutes a calendar year. You would sow in the fall and winter months, and you would reap in the spring and summer months. So this verse, this one verse right here, supports that the agricultural year is months number 7 through 6, and I'm going to, in my next video, explain that the agricultural year is also what the Shemitah year and the Shemitah cycle is based on. So regarding Genesis 26:12 is proof of the agricultural year, months number 7 through 6. It's important to note that in the Greek Septuagint and the Peshitta, which is the Aramaic Targum, that it mentions barley in the verse. Isaac sowed in that land, and he found in that year barley 100-fold. Isaac sowed in the land, and he found in that year 100-fold of barley. And we know to plant the barley, it has to be done at least in that, maybe in the ancient days, maybe depending on how big your fields were, month 8, 9, 10, to have it ready for that first month. So here is the Greek Septuagint interlinear. That's the word barley. It's right there. It's in the verse. And here is the Aramaic Targum, or the Peshitta. And you can see that the word barley is right here in the verse of the Aramaic as well. So that was left out of the Masoretic, so it was probably originally there. I like the Greek Septuagint and what I'm seeing of the Aramaic Targum for the Torah better than the Masoretic Torah. So it's important to note in the first month, the first fruits festival of the barley is on the 26th day of the first month. It's always on the 26th day of the first month, according to the Dead Sea Scroll 4Q325, that pegs the date of the first fruits festival of the barley to the 26th day of the first month. So we have that information and we can understand that. So the barley is Abib when in this month, the month of Abib, which is the month of the Passover, the month that they came out of Egypt. So that is important to note, that the barley has to be ready for the first fruits presentation, green heads, by the 26th, and it takes 90 days, so you would at least have to plant it in the 9th month. So again, Genesis 26:12 is proof of the agricultural year is months number 7 through 6. Here is the word Tekufa Hashanah, and Tekufa is used 4 times, but Tekufa Hashanah, that phrase is only twice, Exodus 34:22 and 2 Chronicles 24:23. Exodus 34 is speaking of the fall, 2 Chronicles 24 is speaking of the spring. And Tekufa is the coming around circuit of time, or the turning of a circuit. But Tekufa Hashanah is the turning of the year. As you can see, it's translated as year's end and end of the year. But it's actually, we know that the Tekufa happens after it turned. So it's the turning of the year, or after the year turned, not at the year's end. The other keyword phrase I want to draw your attention to is Yatsa Hashanah. in Exodus 23:16. This is also translated in the end of the year, but the word yasa means to go out, or come out, exit, go forth, to bring out, to lead out, to deliver, to cause to come out, to bring out, to lead out, to go forth, to go forward, to come out, okay, to be brought out or forth. But here for this verse, the translators also called this the end of the year. They did not really understand the calendar, as I'll explain, to properly translate this verse and give us the proper meaning in English. And this verse is talking about Sukkot, the context of where this keyword phrase is, Yasa Hashanah is used, talking about Sukkot. And Sukkot is the festival of the ingathering, which starts on the 15th day of the 7th month. And we know from Dead Sea Scroll 4Q324D in my last video, the Tekufa is on the first day of the 7th month. And given that the calendar year that we know from Exodus 12 is months 1 through 12, Yatza Hashanah makes no sense of it being the end of the year as the translators translated it. It makes no sense in this verse in relationship to Sukkot unless there is a second 364-day calendar year that is concurrent and runs from months number 7 through 6. So you have the ecclesiastical calendar year, which is months 1 through 12, and then the second calendar is offset by 6 months, starting on the first day of the 7th month and run month number 7 through 6. It's the only way that the translators could mean to see that, for this verse to make sense, is that there is a second calendar running starting in the 7th month. Else, that verse doesn't make sense at all. So as you can see here, this is the word, has it at the end, but that word is yatsa, which means to come out of the year, the going forth of the year, to come out, to lead out, to bring out. It doesn't necessarily mean at the end at all. It's like only you maybe use like this one time at the end. So the main way to use it is to come out. And the Greek Septuagint and also the Aramaic Targum, the English translations of these, is also at the end of the year. So I'm going to be taking a look at why it's translated like that, but it makes no sense at the end of the year at the festival of Sukkot, the festival of the ingathering, unless it's talking about the end of the agricultural year, which is months 7 through 6, as I will explain, which I believe that's what they mean by that and why the translators translated it as end of the year, because the festival of the ingathering, Sukkot, you are supposed to be eating of your increase of that year and bring it down to Jerusalem and eat of it and celebrate with what Yahweh your Elohim has given you that year. And it's the end of the agriculture. So that's why it's the festival of the ingathering, not called Sukkot in Exodus 23:16, because it is the festival of the ingathering of that agricultural year that had just ended on the first day of the 7th month. So again, the translation end of the year does not seem to fit the verse on the calendar year of months number 1 through 12. So Exodus 23:16 is speaking of the festival of Sukkot, which is the ingathering that starts on the 15th day of the 7th month. So sure, the 7th month is the beginning of the last half of the year of months number 1 through 12. But my question again is, why is Yatza Hashanah describing the going forth of the agricultural calendar year, months 7 through 6, that started the year with a Rosh Hashanah on the first day of the 7th month? So here is an analysis of Exodus 34:22 versus Exodus 23:16. Tekufa Hashanah versus Yatza Hashanah. Exodus 34:22. And thou shalt observe the feast of weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering at the year's end. Tekufa Hashanah. So this verse, in context, the feast of the ingathering at the year's end is Tekufa Hashanah. That's what's speaking of at the year's end. And then Exodus 23:16, and the feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labors which thou hast sown in the field, and the feast of the ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field. So that's what Sukkot was all about. It was a harvest festival as well as camping in the tents. And they were to eat of your increase of that year. And so we see these verses are congruent verses. They're talking about the same things with a little bit variations. And the biggest variation is Tekufah Hashanah and Yatzah Hashanah. So these verses are the same set of instructions repeated in two different chapters at two different places with a few differences that are important. And the most important difference is Tekufah Hashanah and Yatzah Hashanah, which are two different words describing the same period of time. This makes the word Tekufah Hashanah and Yatzah Hashanah congruent words. They are congruent words. They have the same meaning because they're describing the same period of time, and they give us different insights into that time period, which is very interesting. So my commentary and question regarding Tekufah Hashanah here in Exodus 34:22 is we know from Dead Sea Scroll 4Q324D, the newly reconstructed scroll, that the Tekufah happens on the first day of the 7th month. So, is Exodus 34:22 talking about one of the 4 turns of the year, or is it referring to the turning of the agricultural year calendar? That's the question. And here we see Yatzah Hashanah, and as I already suggested, maybe going forth or coming out of the year is a better translation of the meaning of Yatzah Hashanah. If this be the case, a context of it would make sense considering the agricultural year beginning in month number 7 and ending there at the 6th month. Because it is talking about when thou hast gathered in all thy labors out of the field, and that all should have happened. All the whole grain harvest should have been done before everybody made their pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. All the men should have come up to Jerusalem with their families and their servants up to Jerusalem for the Sukkot celebration. So I have a half conclusion, and my half conclusion is regardless of Tekufah in Exodus 34:22, referring to one of the 4 turns of the year, or referring to the turning of the new year of the agricultural year, but considering Tekufah Hashanah is congruent with Yatzah Hashanah, and vice versa, Yatzah Hashanah is congruent with Tekufah Hashanah as for the timing of this, they're both speaking of the 7th month in general. And these terms might be made in regards to the head of the year, Rosh Hashanah, and Reshith Hashanah of the agricultural year, months number 7 through 6. So that can help me make sense of this. So again, I just showed you that these terms, even though Tekufah Hashanah appears in Exodus 34:22, speaking of the 7th month, the festival of ingathering, 2 Chronicles 34:22 with Tekufah Hashanah is speaking and referring to the 1st month in the spring that year. So that's really interesting, but I was able to tie this verse, Exodus 34:22 and Exodus 23:16, they're congruent verses speaking both of the Feast of the Ingathering of the 7th month, and that possibly could be speaking of Rosh Hashanah, which we specifically have the date of the Gad Desir. It says at the head of the year, the 1st day of the 7th month. So that text specifically gives us that's a Rosh Hashanah, which is the head of the year. And we also have Reshith Hashanah of Deuteronomy chapter 11, which is, I'm now going to show you, it's speaking of the agricultural order of the year, which is the 7th month, which means beginning, chief, head of the year. So this is getting all very interesting. When you look at it like this, you definitely see that there is an agricultural year, a Reshith Hashanah. Might not say Rosh Hashanah, but it says Reshith Hashanah in Deuteronomy. So let's take a look at Reshith Hashanah here being the head chief of the year. So here is the word, it's Reshith or Reshith, I don't know how to pronounce it in the Hebrew, and it means first, beginning, best, chief of, choice part, the beginning of the year. So Deuteronomy 11, verse 12, a land which Yahweh thy Elohim careth for. The eyes of Yahweh thy Elohim are always upon it, from the beginning of the year even unto the end of the year. So the question is, which year? The calendar year of months number 1 through 12, or the agricultural year of months number 7 through 6? This verse is part of a broader passage of Deuteronomy, chapter 11, 8 through 15. And in this passage, the agricultural order of events is listed in the passage, and they indicate that this verse is referring to the agricultural calendar year, which is months number 7 through 6. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 8. Therefore shall ye keep all the commandments which I command you this day, that ye may be strong and go in and possess the land whether ye go to possess it, and that ye may prolong your days in the land which Yahweh sware unto your fathers to give unto them and to their seed, a land floweth with milk and honey. For the land whither thou goest in to possess it is not as the land of Egypt, from whence ye came out, where thou sowest thy seed and waterest it with thy foot as a garden of herbs. So it was easy to water the land in Egypt. Okay, they had the Nile River. It was easy. They could water with their foot. They just had to kick up a little irrigation ditch, and the water would flow right in. They could water their grain there in the land of Goshen. But the land whither thou go to possess it is a land of hills and valleys. And it's kind of dry, and drinketh water of the rain of heaven. So the water would flow down these hills and valleys. It doesn't catch it. It's harder to irrigate. It's harder to water. So rain is required. A land which Yahweh thy Elohim careth forth. For the eyes of Yahweh thy Elohim are always upon it, from the beginning of the year even to the end of the year. And it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, that I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy grain, and thy wine, and thine oil. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. So what is interesting is Deuteronomy 11 also has Aharit, which means the after part or the end of the year. So not only the beginning, Reshith Hashanah, but it also has the term Aharit Hashanah, the end of the year. And it is important to note that the agricultural order of events in Deuteronomy 11 verse 14 and 15, right here in this box, prove the agricultural calendar starting in fall, which starts in the 7th month. Because the first agricultural event listed in here is the giving of the rain of the land in his due season. And the first rain, sometimes translated as former rain, which is in the fall, followed by the latter rain, which is in the spring. Thus, this is the time frame of the agricultural calendar. And fall starts in the 7th month, and it's month 7, 8, and 9. And that calendar year of the agricultural calendar year starts in month number 7 and goes through month 6, as I will explain further that in the remaining verses. But here, let's take a look at the word for first. The word is yorah, yoreh. It's translated as first rain one time and former rain one time. The early rain, it's the autumn rain and shower rain, which falls in Palestine, or the land of Canaan, the land of the Israelites, from late October until early December. And the latter rain is translated latter rain 6 times. The word is malkoshe. It's latter rain. And the meaning is latter rain, spring rain, the March and April rains, which mature the crops of Palestine. That's the latter rains, the former and latter rains. You see the words for it. Yoreh and Malkoshe. So besides the framework of the first rain and the last rain, the latter rain, the first rain and the latter rain, we get the agricultural events of the harvest in order here in this verse. We see the Pentecost festivals of the first fruits, that thou mayest gather in thy grain, the grain harvest, which is barley and wheat. We see, and thy wine, which is the grape harvest. And then thine oil, which we know is the olive oil harvest. And the first fruits festival of the olive oil, of the new oil, is on the 22nd day of the 6th month. The priests in the temple scroll would have to give thanks for the first fruits festival of the oil. So it would be green oil, it would be fresh oil, just like the green heads of the barley. And it's the early stuff. That's what they would have to present as an offering unto Yahweh to celebrate those events. The new oil, first fruits festival, new oil, it happens right before the agricultural year ends, but the main harvest of the oil is in the fall months of 7, 8, 9. That's when the oil harvest happens. But the beginning of it happens in that calendar year when you are to give thanks for that season's crop and present the first fruits festival. The priests had to give thanks and could not eat of the new olive oil until the priests gave thanks and presented the first fruits offering to Yahweh for that crop. He wanted the grain, the wine, and the oil, and that's how it goes down. Now, verse 15 is interesting because that is speaking of eating the flesh of cattle. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. It's not talking about human beings eating grass. It's talking about humans being able to eat the cattle that ate the grass of the field. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. So this is talking about eating flesh of cattle, and a great time to eat flesh is in the festival of Sukkot, Tabernacles in Jerusalem, which is the festival of the ingathering, celebrating the end of the agricultural year. Ingathering is to celebrate the end of the agricultural year. That's what that part of that festival is. And so you are to bring that and celebrate that when? At the beginning of the new year cycle. And then the rain would later come right after that Sukkot. That's when rain typically comes at this time of the year. I've been living out here in this region for 5 years. The last time I was in Jerusalem for Sukkot was Sukkot 2019. And right after the rains came, same thing in 2018, was there for Sukkot on the 364-day calendar, correctly calibrated non-Gregorian calendar. Right after we left, that couple weeks, rains came right after. So the first rains came, and those first rains, Yoreh, the first rains, they were at the end of the 7th month is when the first rain starts happening. So I talked about the Pittacad cycle of first fruits festivals. We read about it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Temple Scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the calendar scrolls of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The festivals of Yahweh, we see it starting in month number 1. We have the Passover, unleavened bread, and then we have the barley.
Wave sheaf, which is the first fruits festival of the barley harvest.
We count from the barley harvest, which is the 26th day of the first month. We count 7 Sabbaths and number the following day 50. That's the wheat harvest, which is the first fruits festival of the wheat harvest, or what we call Shavuot, which is also the covenant festival according to the book of Jubilees. It's a dual festival. From that day, we count 7 Sabbaths and number the following day, the first day of the week, 50. And that is the first fruits festival of new wine, according to the Dead Sea Scroll, Temple Scroll. We read about the new wine festival in Judges chapter 22. Then from that day, we count 7 Sabbaths and number the following day 50. And that day is the first fruits festival of new oil. And that kicks off the new wood festival, which lasts 6 days. And that's at the end of the 6th month. And then brings us into the Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Shouting, what people call trumpets, not Yom Shofar, but Yom Teruah. And that is on the first day of the 7th month, and that is also called Rosh Hashanah, Jewish tradition, which is probably based on Gad the seer, but it's based on the understanding the agricultural calendar year, because it's the head of this calendar year. We see Reshit Hashanah, and Reshit is like Rosh Hashanah, Atonement, Tabernacles, and then which is the festival of ingathering as well, and then you have the 8th day. So again, this can only be, understand this on the 364-day calendar that's non-Gregorian and solar calibrated, which mine is. So take a look at my calendar playlist. So Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 8 through 15 is proof of the agricultural calendar year of months number 7 through 6, as well as Genesis chapter 26:12 is more proof as well, proof of the agricultural calendar year of months number 7 through 6. In another video, I hope to prove that the agricultural order of events listed in Exodus 23 and Leviticus 25, which are both speaking of the Shemitah year and the Jubilee year, that is based on the agricultural calendar year of months number 7 through 6 and not the ecclesiastical calendar year of months number 1 through 12. I'm going to be explaining that the Shemitah year is the agricultural year, calendar year. And that's in my next video. So I hope that you're blessed by this video, and I'm signing off. And to my brothers and sisters of Master Yeshua the Messiah who have his testimony and guard his commandments, Shalom.